Welcome to the Lantern Cinema Podcast, part of a film society for the initiated, people who love to discuss cult, revival, classic films, and film history. I am your host, Chris Biagini, and joining me are Hannah and Dustin Harmson.
Hello. We're here. We're back. We would like to, as a podcast, like to welcome everyone to our inaugural Halloween episode.
Ooh.
We had previously said in the last podcast that this week was going to be, or this month or whatever it is, was going to be Chinatown, but we decided to bump up the Halloween episode to make sure that we made that happen. So,
because due to all of us having lives, 2 a month is just inaccessible.
We really went into that thinking that it was possible, though, didn't we?
I'm sure we could do it some month. This was just not the month.
Yeah.
It's not the one, but next
not
up,
the time.
Yeah.
maybe November.
And I really feel like these are the perfect arty, spooky Halloween movies, and I just think we just had to make sure that we got this one done.
Yeah, so speaking of Halloween and film, and why we're here, while this is our Halloween episode, it's also an atypical Halloween episode, which I think is kind of typical for the Lantern Cinema. Today we're going to be discussing Kenneth Anger's Magick Lantern Cycle, which is not just one film. It's a collection of his works from the 40s until early 80s.
Yeah.
It spans a long time.
Yep.
So we're going to be running through all of those, and all of them are right for Halloween. I think visually they're all over the place, but a couple of them that we're going to get to seem very fitting and kind of spooky, and nothing is like horror. There's not much violence in any of them, just a couple. But it feels like it fits the Halloween theme regardless.
Yeah.
So hopefully you guys agree.
And I think it also addresses some kind of different subcultures of people that participate in the black arts and some of these type of esoteric kind of religious kind of things.
It's
Kenneth
worth
Anger
repeating.
himself fits the theme.
Yes.
Yeah, we're talking Magic with a K, Kenneth Anger.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Well, before we get into that, do you mind if I talk about future screenings?
Please do, yes.
Briefly. So, the theme of this run of screenings is sequels. So we started with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 earlier in the month. Sorry if you missed that. We're going into Wrath of Khan, Star Trek movie, which we're very excited for coming up here. In January, noticeably skipping December, in January we'll be doing Decline of Western Civilization 2, Penelope Spheris documentary about film in Los Angeles. December. We need to talk about December.
Oh.
Yeah.
We have a sad circumstance with December. So originally, and I almost hate saying what we were going to do, but some people knew about this, we were going to do Empire Strikes Back. Perfect sequel, super exciting.
Pit
Love
Star Trek
Wars.
versus Star Wars
Yes.
back-to-back months.
And I'd always known, like, since I started booking movies, I always knew there was something weird about Star Wars, but I never knew exactly what.
Something's screwy here.
Something
Yeah.
screwy. Something screwy in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I always assumed maybe they're really expensive or whatever. But it sounded like the folks I booked through in Chicago made it sound like, oh, no problem, we got Empire. A few days later, or a few days ago, I got an email back saying, oh, actually, those are owned by Lucasfilms, and they are inaccessible, unlicensable for public viewing. So even if I had a free show, it doesn't, unless it's in my home. I think the take-home point for me that's very sad is that it's illegal to show Star Wars in any public capacity. So we can't do Empire.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad, but you know what? I feel confident that we will find something else that's going to excite people in a similar kind of way. But I'm happy that you brought it up because it does bring up the thought of what makes a movie impossible to be shown. How does that happen?
The whole system, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the
Right.
whole system of booking movies is bananas.
Yes.
That's why I think most theaters have people who do that as a full-time job. They have a booker somewhere who does all that for them because it's insane. There's no, like, regulation. There's no set pricing. There's no, maybe you think you have a movie and you don't, so...
Yes. And it also, now that we're kind of bringing this up, what's the problem? The problem is that Star Wars is owned by the man. And the man's not going to let Star Wars be seen. You know who had a huge problem with the man?
Who?
Someone named Kenneth Anger.
There we go.
Nice.
Thank you. Kenneth Anger had a huge problem working within that Hollywood system. And you know what he said? He said, fuck it. He said, fuck it. He got a wizard hat.
Yep.
And he made some of the most amazing movies of all time. And today, we will be talking about Kenneth Anger. So should we just jump right in?
Yeah,
Let's do it.
Go for it.
Well, first off, the first thing that I want to say, probably out of the three of us, I don't know. I mean, I think we all were impressed when we saw the Magick Lantern Cycle together. I'm probably the one that walked away the most excited. This is like, these type of movies are right up my wheelhouse. These are all films that provide no answers to any questions. However, you know, as we're going to kind of discuss, some of these movies do follow a little bit more of a classic kind of story than one would think. But on just a bare bones viewing, you watch it and you kind of walk away being like, what did I just see?
Yeah, I usually have more questions after each short film than like before or during them. And that was like with taking notes, but my notes are just like weird, funny gibberish.
Yeah.
But I was trying to just like jot stuff down, like, okay, is this going to be relevant in 3 minutes or not? And like connect dots that may or may not be there, or that I was inventing with my own head when I'm watching these.
As a matter of
good.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, just bumping off what you just said, me and Hannah watched one this morning, just another one to make sure that we were ready for this. And do you want to share your notes? What was it that you wrote down? Just like a second. You like had like 3 words that you said. It was. Do you remember?
Gosh, I mean, I think it was literally just like naked man. Tattoo,
which was funny to me because
like kind of what
that's what I said. It was the same movie, Invocation of My Demon Brother, which we'll get into later. But I said, Hannah, I'm pretty sure that Chris said the exact same 3 words to me.
You just start listing stuff you see because you're trying to grasp for something that makes sense plot structure wise or whatever else. So it's
and I think why that is because we're all coming at these films with our preconceived notions of how to watch a film.
Yeah,
essentially.
Which, like, I didn't think we could really do for these.
No. What? Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of wheeling it back here a little bit. How did you both first get introduced to Kenneth Anger in general?
Well, if it's okay, I'll jump in because for me, the answer is you. I remember, so me and Hannah have been together for a very long time, and we've known each other at a lot of different points in our life. But when we were young teenagers, falling in love with each other, I was over in Hannah's basement and at her parents' house, and she had this insane book. How did you even have the book?
My dad worked for a bookstore for a long time. I think it was before I was born or when I was really little. So we had a ton of stripped copies of books that, you know, these cover lists like, oh, Kurt Vonnegut, or in this case, Hollywood Babylon. These things he just brought home and had on a shelf kind of growing mold after a while. And I found it, and it was just, I don't know, for a 15-year-old, you're naturally drawn to all things fucked up and scary. So I think for me, reading about some woman being eaten by her dachshund, or just, I don't know, just all the awful things of Hollywood just were fascinating. So I found that, and then Dustin, I guess, got to that book.
I don't remember if you showed it to me or if it was just lying there, and it has a photo, a very famous photo of Jane Mansfield on the cover, which essentially you can see down her top, and there's pink nipples exposed.
Yeah, it's a black and white cover except for her lips and her nipples.
And his name. I said Kenneth Engelmeyer. That's his birth name. But of course, we're talking about Kenneth Anger, which he changed when he says 5 years old.
Which also is important to know. Kenneth Anger might be the biggest liar of all time. So that'll be a reoccurring theme.
Yeah.
So we both kind of stumbled across Hollywood Babylon. I have no idea what I pictured Kenneth Anger to be when I read that book.
Did you even know he was a filmmaker?
No, maybe I knew it in like the periphery of my knowledge about it, but that's all I knew about Kenneth Anger for maybe 10 years was Hollywood Babylon.
And then for me, the hook getting it back, it's a sad one, but it's true. I've definitely been someone that has studied and kind of researched the Manson family phenomenon,
Right.
and the Bobby Beausoleil gets brought up, of course, throughout that. And then recently, I was like, oh my god, that dude made all these movies with who? Kenneth Anger. And then it was like 15 years. I was like, oh my god, he wrote that book. So it got me just down that kind of rabbit hole of like, what are these?
It's a crazy time frame.
It really
Like
is.
stumble upon this, all of those years go by, and then you find him through this totally separate event where he has like ties to one person that became a part of these murders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
How about
know.
you, Chris?
Very interesting.
Had you heard of him before all this?
I don't think I had heard his name until YouTube. Like, okay, we are doing these, and they're going to be awesome, and they were. And then I should have read all of Hollywood Babylon. I didn't read all of it, but I did read through it, and it is like interesting and kind of bizarre at times, and it is going back to, oh, hey, he might be lying about a lot of this stuff,
Yes.
or exaggerating about some of the stories and things in here.
It's pre-tabloid, right? Or
Yeah.
you know,
Or like
it's-
early days of that kind of thing. But then since we watched those films, I've watched and read multiple interviews, mostly stuff from the last kind of 15 years where he is older. Since,
Oh, buddy, yeah.
'cause, I mean, he was like 2021 when he did Firework.
Well, another thing that we'll get into, it's kind of tricky because his timeline of age, he's lied about how old he is over the years.
He said
Yeah.
he was like 17.
Yeah, he said that he was 17, but it's so hard to kind of pick through all of this stuff.
Either way, he is old.
Yeah.
And he was once young.
Well, he's in his
And he was, like,
90s.
already making
He's in his
films.
90s now.
Yep.
Yeah, like going through that stuff, he behaved slightly differently just in interviews than I would have guessed, having not known that much about his background aside from this stuff. But like a couple of takeaways were that he's disappointed in Hollywood today, that it isn't like Hollywood Babylon, or at least to him it's not that way anymore, and there aren't these crazy scandals and things happening the way he wants. He doesn't own a TV.
Yeah.
He like hates them and thinks that like people get just too much visual information, which he's probably right about. It's like I could be watching and playing stuff at the same time and like not really be paying attention to anything. So maybe there's something to that. But then he's like still very much into magic with a K, basically. Like he's still bringing up those beliefs. I don't know if it's kind of a religious thing or spiritual thing. I don't know how to categorize that and the imagery that he uses in his films.
And I'm sure we'll get a lot more into the actual religious aspects of what these movies are, because there's some people that have argued that these films are some of the most religious movies ever made. They're just right down the gut about a religious theme and really going in depth into those different ideas. But Kenneth Anger himself actually considers himself pagan. It's often, misconstrued that people will come up to him and be like, oh, so you're like the satanic filmmaker. And he's always pretty quick to be like, no, Satanism is an entirely different thing. His whole thing is this whole pagan kind of belief. But the thing I think that I take away from Kenneth Anger, and what I really like about the later interviews, I'm happy that those exist on YouTube and you can read different things about him within the last 10 years, because it sounds like when he was younger, kind of really midway through his career, he was pretty hateful person and pretty angry and way more disdainful of the Hollywood kind of thing. Now Hannah used to work at Chocolaterie Stom down the street. Now he seems like somebody that would
roll into
Chocolaterie Stom and kind of be a charming man. Like in all of the interviews, he always wants to like show his Lucifer tattoo that he has on his chest.
I would have loved it if Kenneth Anger came to Chocolaterie Stom. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
But he also seems like someone, there's this woman who came in and used to make me pick out, like they had this big jar of wine gums, these fruit gummies, and she made me pick out the clear ones and the red ones for her, which is like a pound. It's insane. I feel like he'd be the type of person to pick
That would
gummies.
like
I
have some
think you're
very
right.
specific picky thing about his customer service interactions. He's like,
Yes.
I'll be here and I'll be nice, but I'm going to do this thing that you're going to hate.
Yes, I'm going to be a pain in your ass. I'm going to be very charming. You talked about him being angry. I had a perfect quote for that.
Cool.
From Kenneth Anger's brother, Bob Engelmeyer. He said that Ken isn't so much combative as angry. That's his personality. He was angry at everything and everybody.
Yeah.
So the last name change makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, and in terms of his own personal history of like biographical stuff, his brother, I think it's something like there's like a 7-year age difference between those two. And it basically sounds like Kenneth Anger was always the quintessential kind of younger brat kind of brother. He 100% could not relate to anyone in his family. I think his dad was some type of engineer, so he kind of came from really kind of normal people. However, they did grow up in Beverly Hills, which is interesting to think of, like normal kind of lower middle class people living in Beverly Hills, like during the time of his, you know.
I assume
like
he was from a
during
wealthy
the 30s.
family. I didn't know that.
No, it's more of that. Yeah, his dad is,
Crazy.
and they were not artistic minded people. They absolutely had no leanings towards that. And Kenneth Anger, I think, always was someone who loved all that kind of stuff. And the one thing that Kenneth Anger did luck out with is he had a really great relationship with his grandmother, which her name was Bertha.
Great. Love it.
Yep. He had a great relationship with his grandma, who lived with a woman who, it sounds like it's a little ambiguous. It might be like a girlfriend, or it might just be like a girlfriend in the sense of a friend.
Right.
But her name was Diggy, and she actually did work in old Hollywood costume.
Bertha.
Yeah.
I hope they were a couple.
We should get dachshunds and name that.
Yes. Or Forzaways.
Yeah, Forza's. Sorry.
Diggy. Back
Yeah,
to Diggy.
so he hung out with his grandma all the time, and his grandma was really sweet to him. It sounds like she recognized his kind of artistic impulses and kind of thought it was cool. But Diggy was a costume designer, essentially, for old Hollywood. So Kenneth Anger, in all of the interviews that you'll watch, will always say, well, my grandmother was a costume designer, and she worked for the likes of Rudolph Valentino and all this stuff. That's actually not the case, is what it sounds like. He's attributing characteristics from this other woman, which plays all into kind of the mysterious pinnings of Kenneth Anger. But with that said, Kenneth Anger did have, he grew up with this whole sense of knowing all of these weird details about the likes of Rudolph Valentino and all of these people from kind of the silent era. And he said that his grandmother, or Diggy, they wouldn't tell him fairy tales. They would just tell him the sordid, details of Hollywood at that time. And it was almost like there would certainly be things like he shouldn't have known about. But it was almost like morality plays. But that definitely plays a part of who he is as a person. That's why Hollywood Babylon, I think, is so cool that even exists. It's essentially of a collection of all of these things that he'd known about, true or not. It kind of doesn't matter. So with that said, Kenneth Anger also was a child actor. Are you guys familiar with this?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't look into any of the stuff that he had done, like high school and earlier.
Well, and once again, we're going to get into this kind of sticky
It's like
gray area of Kenneth Anger. His big claim to fame was that he was in a movie when he was 3 years old. It is in Hollywood Babylon. You can look if you want. I think it's at the very last, what's that called? The leaflet of the book or something. Like if you look at right there, you can see him as a 3-year-old boy as the changeling prince in Midsummer's. What's that?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer's Night's Dream, which is a movie from the 30s that the most famous person in it was Mickey. Am I saying that right? Mickey Rooney. He's Santa Claus in Old Rankin and Bassett.
You are saying Mickey Rooney, correct?
Yeah, Mickey Rooney was in the movie. But, he really attributes a lot of his biographical stuff from being a part of this movie. But there's definitely records that indicate that he was not in it. And then I've read stuff saying that is actually him. So it's
but
another
to be
one.
fair,
Yeah.
memory is malleable.
Yeah.
Memory is easily tainted. And I can definitely see, even if these things aren't true, how he would have come to believe them.
Yeah.
Well, and being this like impressionable little kid hanging out with his grandmother and her friend that are telling Hollywood type stories that are also probably exaggerated or being taken in that way. if he is like hanging out at their place when he's 5 or something, like those might as well be fairy tales, but that are set in his own surroundings since he lives in the area. So it makes sense to me that he would develop that way.
Yeah. And I personally believe that he probably, I kind of think that he was in this movie because he does have a lot of details about, like, he talks a lot about remembering what the glue on the trees of, like, you know, the leaves that they made. He has a lot of memories like that. And it sounds like he kind of did bit work later on in other small kind of movies. So he was someone that essentially that was a part of the Hollywood system, but for whatever reason, his career did not proceed past that point.
And maybe that's a good way to kind of launch into his movies. I don't think Kenneth Anger's career, for a good portion of it, was what he wanted. I think he's been, like, intensely himself throughout a lot of the process, and I think he's made some really cool art, but I think a lot of it is a reaction to not being part of the traditional Hollywood system.
Yeah. And he just utilizes a lot of those. Yeah, just like you said, he utilizes a lot of those ideas in his own movie making. What he did do, though, when he was very young, his parents did have a 16 millimeter camera, and that they essentially just used for home movies. And he found, like, extra film, and he just immediately started to want to create his own kind of films. And he did. I don't have the list in front of me, but there's about a series of 3 to 4 short films that he made prior to the first film in the Magick Lantern Cycle, Fireworks. So those films are all now considered lost, so no one can see those to either confirm or deny if that's true or not. But but that does bring us to his first film that he actually did shoot, which is it the most famous? I mean, they're all certain levels of fame, but this one seems to be maybe the one culturally that has the most lasting impact. Fireworks.
Released in 1947,
Jeez.
which is still crazy for me to think about. Like, just slightly post World War II, when he is between 17 and 21, depending on when he was or was not born, but still, like, being young, and then starring in and directing and filming this crazy 5 or 8 minute short film. The notes that I had for this one, in case you were curious, Navy, body image, sexual repression, impossible violence, dick fireworks. That's it.
And
Dick fireworks.
I think that wraps up fireworks, so let's move on to...
And the dick fireworks are so beautiful. When the dick fireworks happen, I almost just want to go... I just want to clap. It makes me so happy. Does anyone want to tackle a synopsis? I don't even know if that's possible.
I do, because Kenneth Anger did for us. By the way, I'm looking at a still of the dick fireworks, which I didn't even want to say that out loud, but I did.
I'm glad you did.
It looks way more obscene when it's not...
When it's not in motion.
In motion, yeah. Just looks like a wiener. Okay. So, Kenneth Anger describes this. Actually, you know what he says? This is one of the best quotes from Kenneth Anger, actually. He says, "This flick is all I have to say about being 17... the United States Navy, American Christmas, and the 4th of July." But more specifically, the given synopsis is: a dissatisfied dreamer awakes, goes out in the night seeking a light, and is drawn through the needle's eye. A dream of a dream, he returns to a bed less empty than before.
And that's a pretty good way to describe it. You know, like my first introduction to this movie, and maybe what kind of got me going to want to see more of the Kenneth Anger stuff, was I had watched, I think I'd heard about it. I was like, oh, I heard this is supposed to be a pretty insane movie. And I Fireworks, YouTube. And the first thing I saw was John Waters discussing Fireworks. And he was just talking about, what am I trying to say? It's essentially like inappropriate or offensive movies. That's what it was, offensive movies. And he said, the most offensive movie, I don't know, I feel like you'd have to go back to something like Fireworks. And I was like, I've got to see this. And I watched it. I personally was shocked. I was kind of like repulsed, to be honest, and not with the sexual overtones of that film, but just there's like definitely a moment where it's extremely violent.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't watch this. It was too much for me. And I remember showing it to you thinking that you would find it repulsive, and you didn't at all.
I think people's descriptions of Fireworks are like more sexual and violent sounding than I think the movie looks. But that's just me.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of fair, though, because... So, it's following a character who is apparently a dreamer, and he's looking in the mirror at himself. He's, like, really thin and trim. He's interacting with a bunch of, like, beefier, buff sailors and, like, naval types, and they seem to be judging him and his body, and he's judging himself and his body, and also judging them, usually approvingly so, until it comes to this bigger moment where there's just, like, a bunch of these guys, and it has this, like, dark turn, but even that segment of the short film is pretty quick.
Yeah.
Mostly it's, like, establishes this kind of mood and tone that's prevalent for most of the film, and then it just, like, comes crashing with, like, this crazy blood and stuff.
And, like, ripping muscles and...
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I do have an interesting thing, if you guys don't indulge me in reading this. This is an interesting thing, talking about specifically the sexuality. Because once again, what did you say the movie... What's the date on the movie again?
1947.
So that's going to be a big theme of what we're talking about today. All of these movies are ahead of their time, maybe even still on a modern context. I can't think of another movie that's like this even now. I think this movie would be shocking even at this point if it was made. But it's certainly ahead of its time, doesn't even begin to process it. In relation to the sexual nature of the movie, as Anger discovered his homosexuality, this was a film that was made kind of during his coming out period, at a time when homosexual acts were still illegal in the United States. He began associating with the underground gay scene. At some point in the mid-1940s, he was arrested by police in a homosexual entrapment. So that's something else we can't even relate to. But during this time, the idea of being homosexual was so deviant, it was deemed illegal. And a lot of homosexual work of this period, and certainly a lot of Kenneth Anger's sexuality in these movies, is kind of into like this masochistic kind of idea. It's like they associate the idea of this kind of secretive world being thrown into this violence.
I think, yeah, we might have, I know we might have mentioned before, but the podcast, Karina Longworth. Yeah, you must remember this. Karina Longworth does all this research, an amazing podcast. She does a whole series about Kenneth Anger, and she did one episode in the Manson family series about Bobby Beausoleil, which is really good. But in that, and Chris, you might... Because you just listened to that, right? Okay, so doesn't she say something about that, like, just the idea of sexuality and, like, violence and danger are inextricably linked?
Yeah.
For a lot of... I mean, for Kenneth Anger and a lot of gay men at that time, just because it was such a dangerous and kind of stigmatized thing in society.
And that's essentially what happens in the film. He goes into the bathroom and he has a cigarette and he asks a sailor for a light. Sailor gives him a light, but it's with like this big branch that's on fire.
Yeah.
So that's obviously some kind of symbolism with that. And then what happens pretty shortly thereafter? He like beats him up. Just this one sailor right now. Yeah. But when he beats him up, it's almost in kind of a sexual, like
eroticized.
It doesn't seem necessarily bad. It's like, oh, you know, it's like, it seems like he's okay with it. So at the time, though, this movie, when it was screened, was like, people could not believe it. So much so that he was actually put on trial for this film, deemed...
Oh, like an obscenity charge?
Yeah, an obscenity, obscenity charge. But he was later acquitted for it. And during that time, he made one tremendous accolade. He made two, actually, but... a very interesting one was Alfred Kinsey.
Oh, he got accolades from Kinsey? Yes.
Well, yeah,
they had a relationship because he was so fascinated by the sexuality in his movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he bought the print. Like, he actually bought a print of Fireworks. And if you still go to the Kinsey, wherever, like, the estate or whatever the archive is, you can go see the original print of Fireworks. He still has it within his possession. And they kind of established, certainly for the rest of Kinsey's life, a lifelong kind of friendship where they, I think Kinsey was just super interested in the sexuality of Kenneth Anger. Mm-hmm. I think, and I've read different accounts of Kenneth Anger talking about how Alfred Kinsey wanted to know exactly how he masturbated. So very, very interesting. The other friend that he made through fireworks was Cocteau. Cocteau is amazed. I don't know if have you seen Beauty and the Beast or any of these any of the Cocteau movies?
I don't think I've seen.
You'll love them. It'll be exciting when we get to that point. Because Kenneth Anger was definitely a fan of his films. And how would you describe those movies?
We might need to edit the joke out, but I just have to say it. Yes, he was a big fan of Cocteau.
A big Cocteau fan, indeed.
What was the question?
How would you
describe this?
She was excited. How would you describe his films, Cocteau's movies?
Magical and fantastic.
How is magical spelled for his movie?
Magical with a single C. Because they were, the idea of like magic, and we'll talk more about Thelema and magic with a K, but the differentiation between K magic and magic with a C is to differentiate between stage magic, like illusions and tricks. And Cocteau is all about illusions and tricks on film. They're beautiful. Yeah,
they're amazing.
Yeah.
They certainly operate under a surrealistic kind of dream logic kind of thing, which certainly informed fireworks.
Yeah.
He certainly would have been...
That kind of comes up.
Yes. Yes. He certainly was familiar with Cocteau's work. And another kind of surrealist filmmaker is Maya Deren, who we should talk about at some point later on. And she'd be a good one to do a podcast on. But this movie is very similar to a lot of things that people had done previously. But once again, going back to his grandmother and Diggy, they were really cool to take him to kind of art house, kind of cinema stuff. So that's how he would have been influenced by that stuff. But how cool is it that Cocteau saw these films, like he sent them a copy of Fireworks because he was such a fan. Cocteau saw it and like put it in a film festival and it won essentially. And Cocteau like wrote him personal letters just saying like, this is one of the most amazing movies that I've ever seen. And eventually Cocteau actually invited him to go to France to live and kind of make movies under his guidance a little bit. And we'll get to that point later. So we're kind of talking about the surrealist element of his movies. One of the things that he also developed a deep friendship with another kind of experimental filmmaker named Curtis Harrington, which we'll probably touch on some of his movies later on. But Curtis Harrington was a filmmaker that actually did introduce him to all of the Crowley kind of philosophy. Crowley, that's right. Sorry.
Kenneth Anger will be the first to correct you.
Yes, he would.
Well, it's interesting knowing that stuff is coming later and that he started with Fireworks, but then off screen has legal trouble, has blowback, and maybe that kind of informs his 1949 film Puce Moments?
Puce
Moments?
As in the color, right? Puce. What color is that?
I don't
even know what color that is.
Puce Moments.
Puce is...
Do we not know? I have no idea what
it's a color that
it's
nobody
uses. It's an ambiguous...
Is it even a crayon? No, sorry.
But for that to be the second film and to feature just one person on screen who is also a woman instead of like this
sexy man.
Instead of a bunch of beefy dudes, there's just one woman and then eventually dogs. It is way different tonally, visually. The music is awesome. And it sounds like it's 10 or 15 years ahead of its time to me. Like,
I think it is. I think because the music was pulled in later.
Okay.
Puce Moments is probably the one thing that really pulled me into Kenneth Anger because it's so beautiful and cool, and it's his cousin on screen who's just really kind of vivacious and gorgeous, and they have the cool costuming. Yvonne Marquis.
Yeah, I think that's her name.
Yeah,
I didn't notice that.
Allegedly went on to be the mistress of the Mexican president, and I don't know, there's just this cool, like, it's Hollywood and they have the cool borzois, and it's just the little girl in me is like, oh, this movie's just so pretty, I like it. It's not violent. I think it is, you talked about comparing Fireworks to 1949.
Dramatically different.
Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's
just very colorful and kind of playful. Like, it starts with, I think I had described it as a phantom runway show because you're seeing like clothing and things going by, but at first there's like no person there. It's just like different and fun.
I want to jump on what you just said right there because you're talking about the clothing. I do think that's one of the things. It's energy, right?
Yeah.
A simple way to get energy in a movie. That's a special effect that cost absolutely no money. It was just having this jangling kind of costumes. But I did want to say those were actually costumes that Diggy or his grandmother, Kenneth, if you're listening, feel free to email us what we just said wrong.
Don't cast the spell on us.
Don't, not the
Please.
the frog one, not
Toad.
that one. Yeah,
Curse of the Toad.
Yeah, we don't want that one. Anyways, but they're just dangling in front of the camera, and like instantly, you're just like, I love this. It's just, but those costumes were costumes that Diggy gave to him from silent
That's awesome.
film. And if it's okay, I'm going to interject a quote that Kenneth has about the movie because I think you guys have touched exactly on what it was that he was trying to do. Puce Moment was my love affair with mythological Hollywood. With all the great goddesses of the silent screen, they were to be filmed in their homes. I was in effect filming Ghost. Puce is the changeable color of the lowly flea, the iridescent color of her 1920s gowns. And, they call it Puce Moments because it was supposed to be something that was going to be a much longer film. This was just supposed to be one little chunk of it. And after that Boyzoid part, it's supposed to go off into this. Did I say it wrong?
Can you say it again for me?
Boyzoids? Are they robots? How do you say it?
Borzoi, sorry.
Borzoi,
I
yeah.
shouldn't just sit here and giggle at you.
But anyways, it was supposed to be a part of a larger kind of film. And another interesting part about this movie is Kenneth Anger had kind of gotten himself into some circles a little bit with some Hollywood actors and actresses with more of an experimental leaning. And he was actually close to securing a deal to get a whole bunch of money through Gene Kelly to proceed with this movie, but it didn't work.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Does anyone want to talk about the soundtrack of what it's like? I don't know the name of the person. It's unfortunate because it's such a cool music. But how would you describe it?
Jonathan Halper.
Ooh, yeah, nice.
I mean, this was one where, if memory and notes serve correct, had a song that just sounded like it'd be some badass 60s band.
Oh, yeah.
That would be like playing all the big festivals and be one of the new like British Wave or something that everybody's into, but it was something that I'd never heard of.
When I first watched it, I remember I was instantly thrown into the music, and I thought, this sounds like something now that would be like on a Pitchfork thing, like the most like lo-fi. Who is this band? I'm so into it.
They'd get a 7.5, but there'd be like nothing said bad about them in the review, and then like they just knock off some points because they can.
And the lyrics, like it's very interesting because it's like, yes, I'm a hermit. It's all this stuff about kind of self-evaluation with these kind of glamorous, somewhat sexual imagery kind of going on. There seems like there's a couple.
There is like a shift, for sure, where it does get like more playful in a sexual manner instead of in a just like fun fashion whatever way.
Yeah, but there's something just irresistible about that film. I think we all just love. Maybe Hannah could help with this because I feel like she's gonna understand more, and if not, I can try to do my best. But did you understand from a photographic sense how that the effect, because one thing that I think also sticks out to people when they see it, when this lady moves, she walks in a really kind of jagged, like, how is this a camera trick? Like, how does this happen? I read how it happened. Do you understand it enough that you could explain it? I know it happened by accident.
It looked like vaguely stop motion-y to me, but without actually being stop motion.
Yeah, I think it's something we were talking something about this where they sped up the film, but had her move slowly, but at the same time. Okay, so yeah, you're showing me notes here. There wasn't enough light, so it was filmed 8 frames a second. Had her walk. Okay, so I see.
I don't understand enough about photography to explain this.
They actually, filmed it 8 frames a second and had her move slowly. But what made it seem weird, and so that's basically to allow for more light to be exposed. Her earrings were still moving,
yes.
And there were some things they couldn't control speed-wise, so it looked really kind of jagged and kind of creepy. That part with her foot, I always think kind of looks
awesome.
like horror movie editing or something like that.
And that's also something that was attributed to Curtis Harrington. He's going to come up a few times in this, but Curtis Harrington was the camera operator for this film, and he kind of accidentally discovered that.
Yeah, I was gonna say if there's like a yin and yang of like gay avant-garde filmmaking, it's Kenneth Anger and Curtis Harrington.
Yeah, and they both kind of come from a similar aesthetic. Curtis Harrington has a movie that's often kind of paired with Fireworks or compared, and it's called Fragment of Seeking, which kind of has homosexual undertones as well, but not in as glorious and crazy of a manner as that one. And they kind of worked hand in hand, and actually, as a matter of fact, Curtis Harrington and Kenneth Anger also established their own film society and actually brought kind of art house movies to California and had like this whole secret club, which is really cool. That they,
Bless them. Yeah,
yeah. So after that, so we're talking about Puce moments, kind of going in. I should say this. One thing that's hard about the Magick Lantern Cycle that I had a hard time with was understanding what in the fuck that actually means. Because you watch these movies, we're talking about from Fireworks and now we're on to Puce moments. They almost feel like they have nothing in common with each other.
Right. Like, I think maybe not those two out of the whole list, but they are a couple of the bigger contrasts.
Right.
I think when we get a little bit later on, I'm blanking on...
You can describe it, but I can help you.
Okay. When we get to the French one, that is also, I believe, called Firework, but in French.
Oh, yeah, sure. You'll
like,
help us
that
with that
one, I think, is the most isolated one. That is the biggest contrast between all the other films. But then this is kind of like second. It's like his first and second films in here were way different.
I just wanted to say, from what I understand, and I feel pretty confident about this, the Magick Lantern Cycle just refers to Kenneth Anger's films that are often screened together, and they have some similarities, but essentially this is his life's work, and if we were to do a screening of Kenneth Anger, we would do the Magick Lantern Cycle showing all of those. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I mean, it's like trying to listen to Buddy Holly. You're not going to get an album.
No.
You're not going to get the feature-length Hollywood Kenneth Anger. You're going to watch all the little bits and pieces that are the greatest hits.
And to get through it, it's nearly 3 hours. And I think I certainly, because we had to, with our schedule, we had to do it in a way where...
Guess who fell asleep again?
Right before the awesome parts, too.
That's you guys have 2 kids.
Yeah, it's so it happens. Well, we had to start it like at 9 o'clock, which did like allow for like when it gets spooky, it was really fun. But even though it's 3 hours... It doesn't feel like 3 hours because you're watching, like this one is what, maybe 5 minutes
6
or
minutes
6 minutes, yeah. So
and most of them are less than 10 minutes. A couple are longer, but most are on the short side. And I think that also helps lend itself to not feeling like it's taking that long. It's because you're just watching like different episodes of shows.
And each one's...
Even different shows.
Yeah, they're so interesting, too. I don't think it matters, you know. By the time we were watching this for the first time, you know, we're at Puce moments. Once it got to Rabbit's Moon, I remember watching this, and I had an idea of what Kenneth Anger was. I just thought, what in the hell is this? I loved that. Like, I connected so strongly with it. I was like, this is so cool. So Rabbit's Moon is the film that he was actually, you know, sent to France to make, essentially. And he kind of worked his way into this French film company. And on the weekend, when they weren't, using this particular studio, they allowed him to make this film. And the cool, I think one of the more cool things about Rabbit's Moon, it's the one that harkens back to his youth. This movie, if you actually look at Midsummer's Dream, the movie that he's allegedly in, it looks pretty similar, actually, like the way the backgrounds look. Kenneth Anger actually went in and like built this whole set. Like he went in and glued all of the leaves on the trees.
Oh, no way. I thought it was just there.
No, he made all that stuff. He did that in a week. Like, it's pretty crazy what he did. He hired mimes. Do you know the name of that school? I don't know it.
It's the French clown school. Very prestigious. Don't remember what it's called.
Yeah. And essentially there's 3 characters. Essentially in Rabbit's Moon, he combines 2 different mythologies. One of them is Pierrot, Harlequin, and what's the Combine? I'll look it up. I have it written down somewhere here, but it's like this love story between these 3. Harlequin kind of being like the devil character that pops up and is kind of the mischievous one that stops him.
Sinister jester kind of look to him, to me. Like he's not like a clown or a mime, but he does have this like weird entertainer type outfit, but also like is not a good guy.
No. And it's also, I think, within this cycle, it's the first film that starts having some of the more like esoteric, like evil kind of vibes.
Yeah.
Like you can sense something's coming here.
Symbols.
Yeah. There's we can talk more about those in a moment, I suppose, but there's just symbols that come on where as a person you're like, I don't know what this is, but this is evil. I'm sure it's evil. That's how I felt.
It might also have like the most detailed narrative of these.
I think so,
three,
yeah.
Where there are like characters being introduced over time, different interactions with them, different emotions. Even though it starts a little bit slower, the back end of it has a lot more going on than I think Peace Moments did.
Yes. And it's also the first film of his to be made in 35 millimeter. It's actually the only one of all of his films that are made in 35 millimeter. It's the only time that he ever had a chance to do that, which is crazy. But yeah,
I was going to say maybe since, I know Rabbit's Moon 2 comes a little later, but we can talk about how there are two different versions of Rabbit's Moon. One is, gosh, how long is it?
This one, it's close to, I think, 16 minutes, 17 minutes.
Almost 20 minutes long, rounding up. Versus the one that's played almost double speed with some sections cut out plays much faster and kind of comedically.
Yeah.
That, side note, our 3-year-old loves.
Can't get enough of it.
She can't. It's adorable.
Yeah. But this version, it's a much, it's in normal pacing, and it tells a much different kind of slower story. But the soundtrack is just incredible.
That's the heartbreaker of this podcast, I think, is that we cannot legally play all these wonderful songs for you.
We wish we could have it going right now.
So I think we're maybe going to share a Spotify playlist or something. But yeah, the music makes these movies across the board.
Because I guess we haven't even mentioned this comment yet, but all of these short films are otherwise silent films.
Yes.
So there is music, there's a soundtrack. It's very spot on for all of these. There is no spoken dialogue.
Nope.
Two or three films you can see like characters that would be saying something to each other, but the audience or viewers don't hear anything. There's no subtitles. Like, it's basically short films for all of them. So the music is really important.
Yes.
And part of why the second version of Rabbit's Moon has this kind of comedy to it is because there's only one song being used, and it's shorter than the film is, so then it just gets played again. Which was a great moment when that first happened.
Brief pause, song just restarts.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that the music element of his movies is getting brought up, because it's certainly the thing of his films that's probably the most influential on a greater cinematic scape. But I did read, well, first off, there's a couple things to be said here. All of these movies, and this kind of goes back to what is the Magick Lantern Cycle, Kenneth Anger is literally casting spells through these. I'm telling you, that's truthfully what he's trying to do. He deems cinema as the ultimate kind of black magic ritual that you can do to influence people. So here's a direct quote from him. "I've always considered movies evil. The day that cinema was invented was a black day for mankind." So it gives you a landscape of where his mind is coming from that. And then another person said, "Each of Anger's films is framed as a ritual. They depict rituals, and if one accepts Anger's stated intentions, they also perform rituals. The various elements within each film are calculated to have specific effects upon the viewer."
Who said that?
I'm not 100% sure. I need to make sure that I have that.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. As Carl,
in the notes for the episode, we'll add more stuff.
As Carl Rowe was succinctly explained, all of his films have been
evocations or invocations,
attempting to conjure primal forces, which once visually released are designed to have the effect of casting a spell on the audience. The magic in the film is related to the magical effects of film on the audience, essentially.
He even has a page cited, but no author.
I'm sorry, I'm just learning how to do all this.
You can tell that Dustin is the music teacher of you two, and not like an English or writing teacher.
Yep. But I think that goes back to the idea of the music. I think the reason he's using these kind of musical moments, he is very purposely trying to get these ideas of Thelema and his personal beliefs onto the audience. And like anytime me and Hannah are at home and start talking about Kenneth Anger, we will always sing one of the songs, and it instantly makes us go down that rabbit hole.
Was this where there was one that you'd mentioned you just like reference to each other sometimes and nobody else knows what the hell you're talking about?
Oh, we have several. I'm at the point of no
Nope,
regret.
can't sing it.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Less than 3 seconds.
So we have that, and then there's also a moment that when we see each other, we kind of give ourselves a waving salute, much in the same way as in Luciferizing, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But I think Rabbit's Moon is kind of that first film that does, starts going into that magical kind of world. And now I think that brings us to the direct French. Well, could you say the French title? I can't say it.
Well, I think you guys are missing a joke.
Are we? What is it?
I think you are. Because, okay, so in French, fireworks is feu d'artifice. It's like artificial fire. And this one's lieu d'artifice is like artificial water. So I think it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be a play on fireworks, but it's water shooting up in the sky.
Which
and,
would
like,
then
lighting
make
everything
the
up.
actual film make more sense to me.
Yeah.
Like the title is a better matchup then. Because this is maybe the one we'll talk the least about. I don't know. We'll see.
I think easily. Yeah.
We could skip this one.
Well, no,
Okay.
I have a whole thing that I'm excited
This
to read.
is following like one woman in the fanciest of clothing, just surrounded by water and fountains. Basically,
The
she's just going for
fanciest
this
of music.
like nice Sunday afternoon walk, and you just see water and like faces and masks and things built into some of these fountains.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, at least visually for me, the like least interesting and least telling of his films. So then this, followed by the next one, which we will get to, that is like the biggest difference between his films for me, is this and then what he followed it up with.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, there was a jump.
There's definitely a jump.
Technically, and so
Yes.
I'm ready to kind of. I know you have something you want to say about this, but Dustin handed me the description here that Kenneth Anger wrote, which he says: hide and seek in a nighttime labyrinth of levels, cascades, balustrades, grottos, and ever gushing, leaping fountains, until the water witch and the fountain become one. Now, why did you want me to read that?
Well, first off, one of my favorite things about... Well, I knew there was going to be words I wouldn't say as elegant as you, so I wanted you to say it because I wouldn't be able to. But I love the fact that in the credits of this film, there's only one character, and the character's name is the Water Witch. So even
is a
though...
good name.
Yeah, even though this movie arguably is probably the most... Well, I think all of his movies are beautiful to some degree, but this one, like, is very visually kind of amazing. Seeing all the water on, it's
I'm just
very...
gonna say I know it's in black and white movies when they make it look like nighttime. It's like clearly people riding across the desert in the middle of the day, but they put a filter on it so it just looks weird. Like you can still see sunshine gleaming off
Yeah,
things.
it
that we're
did
supposed
not
to,
look like night.
Hate it. Makes me uncomfortable.
I like the blue filter though. That's on it. You don't like that at all? I mean, it's on Rabbit's Moon as well, though. That blue filter to
I
kind
didn't say I hated the filter entirely.
Okay, good.
Just that one was on a
with,
set. This
with that
one
having
was
set,
sunshine.
it looks like night.
Exactly.
Quick, just because we actually mentioned Rabbit's Moon again, one of the other changes between the two versions of that was the actual moon and the depiction of it, where it was very artsy in the first version when they're showing it, and then way more realistic the second time around.
Yeah, cartoon moon versus...
So yeah, but between the moon and the music, those are like the two takeaways of, why is this different?
Yeah.
How is it different?
Well, and in terms of when it was actually screened, this movie is thought to be kind of the intermission of all of the Magick Lantern Cycle. This is the moment where it's kind of like, because after this is
Then it
fucking
just
all downhill.
Goes all in.
It's
every
crazy.
time.
This
Yeah.
is the moment of just kind of brief, kind of relaxing before you get to that point. But are you guys ready for your minds to be blown about this film?
It better be.
This is going to blow your minds, and it's going to sound like everything that I say here is not true, but I'm going to go to the man himself.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Kenneth Anger.
Oh my God, is he here?
No, Kenneth, no. I'm going to go ahead and read to you what his initial intention of this film was. So, Kenneth he wanted to go to Rome to make a film about a cardinal. I don't know that one. What's that word?
Oh, never mind.
Anyways, he was the youngest son of the family that made the Tivoli fountain. a sex magic cultist that like to have sex with goats and be peed on.
Okay.
The whole garden is a private dirty joke. It has 10,000 fountains and everything is pissing on everything else. It's like an exhaustible piss. There are sphinxes pissing out of their tits, which I think is wonderful.
Oh,
He used to throw orgies in the garden at night. Was supposed to be the first part of 4 different segments that would get more sexually graphic.
No, thank you.
What do you guys want
I
to say?
know I'm like clutching pearls here, but I'm like, come on. I mean, that's like.
This was just Dustin's excuse to crack up that laugh.
Before we started recording, I told Dustin to laugh at the ceiling. So it would blast everybody's speakers. I don't know. Like, that's the point where I'm like, okay, we get it, Kenneth Anger.
That's his whole thing, though. He's a little naughty boy. That's what he wants to be. What's the term that they always say about him? Infant.
Like enfant terrible idea.
And that's what he associates with. He loves the idea of just like, you know what? I'm naughty.
Okay.
Which brings us to his next film.
Yes, can we go from Water Witch to legit witch?
Yes, can I say one thing? I have one last thing.
Aye.
Maybe the only cool part of the P movie is we noticed this. I didn't notice it any of the other times. There's the one scene where all of a sudden the Water Witch has a fan that's like golden out of nowhere. Did you notice it last time?
The one time there's color. She just has this golden fan. Right there.
Kenneth Anger spent considerable amount of time actually hand painting that on the film itself. So it's a very practical effect.
Now I'm wondering why she had a golden fan. Was it because there's supposed to be pee everywhere and fan is just covered in fountain pee?
Fountain pee. Waterworks, my friends. Anyways, keep rolling. All right, where are we at? We're doing good. We're doing good here.
On.
Yeah, we got a lot of little movies to get through.
We're almost saying we're doing good, actually.
But now we're getting into kind of the modern famous. Okay, inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. I'd love to hear your notes on inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
Okay, I can get there, but this is the one that has just. I think the title of this one has the biggest impact on my imagination. Like, for a couple of these, like, fireworks, it's like, okay, I don't necessarily know what that'll be. Maybe I expect there to be a firework, and there is a very specific one.
Oh, there is.
But when you hear inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, it just has, like, more possible connotations with what that movie may be, and I think that might be part of why this one ends up having the most like spectacular visuals. If you're just Googling Kenneth Anger films, this is the one that I think has some of the most just images and GIFs and things popping up. There's so much stuff from this film. It's also, I think, the longest.
It is.
I think so.
Yep, it's nearly 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's epic. I hate that word, but
I think it absolutely.
I think in terms of
describes
like his films and what it evokes, there's just this like grand grotesqueness to some of what is being shown. And at this point, since we were 5 films in, I have like a bunch of just random little notes about it. The one thing I have underlined is that this is kind of like a devilish opera about overindulgence.
Oh, dude, that's a really good interpretation, actually.
That was
Nice
like
work.
the one like key underlined takeaway I had, and I was like grasping to try to pull a major theme out of this one. I think because of the entire place, it takes us all of the things that it's throwing at us, and then being 5 films in, be like, okay, I know that there's some stuff here that I'm probably missing. And I was trying to see if things from this film were correlating to like all of the 7 deadly sins. I couldn't do that. I could pull 3 or 4 of them, but not all 7. And I'm not sure what the narrative arc I was supposed to take away from this one was, but just the entire 40 minutes was a trip.
I will say this with what you just said right there, the 7 deadly sins. I find it interesting analysis-wise that you yourself, but I think all of us maybe would kind of do the same thing. You connected to the somewhat evil or elusive or just like what is the belief system behind
Yeah.
here. But you did it through kind of a Christian kind of context. And that's the issue that finds fault. You're not going to find seven deadly sins
Right.
because the actual belief system that Kenneth Anger follows has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, this is where his movies take a deep dive into his belief system.
And his lifestyle, it seems like.
Yeah.
And his lifestyle and the people he connected with really strongly for most of his mid-artistic years. He, like I said, somewhere in here, I don't know when exactly life-wise for him, but he took that dive into Thelema. The movie's dedicated to Aleister Crowley. He says specifically in his write-up and everything else. So this movie has a lot to do with that.
And this was from 1954. So fifth
So
film
insane.
in 7 years.
Did you even put
And
that in the context that it's
54.
at?
No,
early?
I think
Like-
every time people bring up the years, I think that's important because I'm like, how did this happen?
Because even just this one predates the other movies we have talked about in past episodes and is so different. And like technology is not holding it back. Like
Absolutely not.
he seems to be pushing some of what was even possible.
Yeah. On a biographical context, I had mentioned before that Curtis Harrington had turned him on to Crowley's kind of philosophies, but it was more from Harrington was just like a big believer. He just loved like Edgar Allan Poe and just kind of like writings like that. And Crowley has like these whole collections of writings. He was a lot of things. It sounds like he was an artist. He was someone that essentially created his own religion kind of based on
A prophet.
a prophet. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. But amongst that too, he was just like a writer that kind of, people that had an inkling into these little spooky little things kind of had an interest into. So at that same time, you were kind of talking about the 50s. There was actually a group within California, which Kenneth Anger grew up in California, so this is how this happened. There was a group that practiced all of Crowley's kind of sex magic, whatever, and, we'll get more into that later, but it was a group called the Agape Lodge that existed, and one of the people that existed within this group was Jack Parsons, who was... he was a rocket, essentially what he was.
There's so many crazy things connected to Kenneth Anger that I feel like could all merit their own podcasts. But yeah, Jack Parsons, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and this is going to be the longest podcast, and I think it's okay because we have a lot to kind of get through. And I think
Talking about a whole bunch
we're
of
talking about a
films.
lot of stuff, and it'll be interesting to get into all of it. So Jack Parsons was someone who did actually work for the United States. I don't even know how to describe it. Like NASA? Is it
He was like a rocket scientist.
He's a rocket scientist. He actually, I think, like invented rocket fuel.
Yes. I think
Straight up. And there's something in the sky, like a planet or a star that's actually named after Jack Parsons. Like, he's a big deal, but 100% into sex magic stuff. He was so into the Crowley stuff, so much so that he practiced the rituals, and he was a part of these different things. But one of the rituals that he did, he tried to summons the Scarlet Witch, which is something that's really held strong, highly within the Crowley kind of system. It's supposed to be like the sacred whore. It's this terrible name. Yeah, she's like the something of Babylon. I don't know, something like that. But anyways, he wanted the Scarlet Witch to come to
Whore
him.
of Heaven.
The Whore of Heaven.
Whore of Heaven.
There we go. Well, and who came to the door like after he did this ritual? This elusive Iowan. From where is she from again? Is it Belle Plains?
Belle Plaine or what cheer?
I think it's Belle Plains.
Okay.
But she, Dennis Hopper called her an actual out and out witch, and her name is Cameron.
Marjorie Cameron from
Yep.
Iowa.
Yep. And they got married, and they were a part of this whole sex magic thing in California, in this Agape Lodge. And Jack Parsons, sadly, in some mysterious circumstances, which it sounds like no one will ever 100% know what happened, blew himself up.
Since I had been unfamiliar with him, I looked him up quickly, and it is talking about being a chemist and rocket propulsion researcher and whatnot on Wikipedia, and how his cause of death is explosion in 1952, so 2 years before this was released.
Yep. And it's up in the air whether or not he was actually performing some kind of ritual that went wrong.
Really?
Because occultist was also listed in his bio.
Absolutely.
Here's this like incredible like engineering and research work he's done. Occultist.
If you're interested, there's a book called Strange Angel, which is just supposed to be incredible
and there's
detailing.
a show which will henceforth be referred to as Strangel that I refuse to watch because they completely cut out Marjorie Cameron, and I think she has to be one of the more interesting parts of his story.
Yeah.
So yeah, Cameron's in this movie. She's probably the most predominant female character in the movie. Super witchy looking, really cool.
Instantly, I mean, you're just drawn to her. Are you familiar with which one she is? She's the one that's red. She's the one who has the little devil on her head.
Yeah.
She's the main character. I mean,
pretty much, like, not from the start.
No.
It starts with, why I was trying to tie in Seven Deadly Sins, it kind of starts with, like, sloth to me of, oh, hey, here's this guy, he's got all these rings and beads and things. And it's just in bed.
Yeah.
Like, he's just laying in bed, but with, like, all of this amazing jewelry and stuff just, like, draped over him.
Yeah.
And then it just turns into this totally different thing, featuring one or two characters, at least, that are, like, maybe not human.
Yeah.
With, like, the mask and things they have going on. And then with her kind of becoming the new, like, protagonist for the rest of the film.
And what had happened was, on a biographical sense, they had somehow befriended each other through California, through those Crowley kind of stuff. And she was...
Hey, did I see you at the last sex magic ritual?
Yeah, exactly. I thought you were talking to me. I was like, I don't do that shit. Anyways,
so she did.
Somehow or another, through this California circle, they became like really good friends. Like they became Kenneth Anger and her. Kenneth Anger actually lived with her for a while, and she kind of was like a motherly figure to him and really introduced him to a ton of this Crowley kind of stuff. And as a matter of fact, in Hollywood Babylon, if you look at the beginning of it, it says to the Scarlet Woman, and who he's referring to is her. So kind of tying all that in. You're talking about the creatures that aren't human. Yeah, they're not, because I think, do you know what they are? The characters that are in the film?
I don't. I tried to do most of my research focused on Thelema and what it was and what it means, and I don't know enough to make the connections I think I need to make here. Within
this, I've definitely seen things. You can read like all the characters that are here. It sounds like we don't know enough to really get deep, but it is like the most like it's the film that goes the most into the actual Crowley kind of belief system and actually has gods and things that they celebrate. So some of the characters within the film are the Scarlet Woman we've talked about, Lord Shiva. Some of these I don't think I'm going to be able to pronounce.
And I'm not either, so don't even.
Yeah. But anyways, there's a series of about 7, and more or less kind of what happens in the film is at some point some type of drug is introduced to this party of characters, and it's the drink in the film that they drink, and then all of a sudden everyone's just like yeah, and like everyone's like freaking out for like 20 minutes or something.
There's just like different types of consumption happening, because I think there's at least 2 instances where someone is eating or like being fed necklaces and jewelry and stuff, maybe even before the drink happens. It was bizarre. But like another thing I had in here, and now I wish I remembered the instance, was that there was one shot that seemed to be kind of referencing the woman from Puce Moments. Like I thought it maybe was even just like a direct thing from that film. And I can't think of other movies of his that we'll get to that like directly relate to something else he had done.
I think the only correlation that could be made with that, now I'm just thinking this now, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it actually I think they introduced that character from Puce Moment right at the moment of everyone freaking out from whatever this drug that's taking place at this party, and the shot of her is like her like rolling her eyes
when
back in her head.
When she was being like laid back and it was more sexual.
Slightly sexual, so I think it's tied into kind of those similar ideas. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of what this movie is. Essentially, it's very simple in that way. But it also does introduce the idea of drugs being used to take you to a higher plane. This is the first film that does that, and pretty close to each film coming up, that's a theme that comes up time and time again.
And I don't know enough about film or technology or anything to know if this is accurate, but was it images being superimposed? Yep. Okay, because this is the first time that is prevalent, and in a big way. There's at least one moment where it's hard to figure out how many layers are on the screen at one time, because there's just so much going on visually. And you might have even made this comment when we were watching it, Dustin, but watching this film while under the influence of anything, I imagine could go very poorly because of what you're seeing. Like, just watching that sober at 10 o'clock on a Monday or whatever it was, it's like, man, there's a lot to take in already.
And I find it scary. Do you guys find it scary?
I think this is the most maybe sinister-ish film of his, and not because of like the sexual deviancy that is in it necessarily, but because of how some of the characters look, and this guy with the mask, and this kind of like devilish character, and even that like blonde poor man's Robin Hood looking dude. Yeah, just like the expressions that he had made me like feel off when I was watching this one.
Are you afraid of it or not really?
I'm not. I think that Dustin likes these because I think he finds it really creepy and kind of unsettling. I don't think I get that. Yeah. I'm more susceptible to the modern horror movies.
Same.
I find it spooky because I know that this is based on real life. Kenneth Anger is showing us a piece of his own life, and this was a belief system that these people had, and it's an underworld that I have no backing in, but to know that something like that is even going on freaks me out a little bit.
This film kind of reminded me, to reference our own show, of the like crazy party near the end of La Dolce Vita.
Sure.
It was like that, but American instead of Italian, and with the dial just cranked up. Like, if you thought that was like a weird crazy party and people being kind of assholes to each other, this was like a whole new level and with a lot more drugs.
Right. Yeah, I think that kind of like artistic depiction of excess and yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to see.
And what happened was, on a biographical sense, you're talking about a party. This film was made because of just this amazing it was just a costume party that was thrown at kind of this big weirdo's house named Samson DeBreer, who was into all this Crowley shit as well. Crowley shit, excuse me, as well.
Crowley shit.
Anyways, he had this place in the hills of Beverly Hills, essentially, where all like stars would actually go to. There's photos of Dennis Hopper and Jane Fonda, and even Stanley Kubrick has been known to visit this house. And they had... What's that?
I don't think he does much visiting anymore. But.
No, he's really dead. But anyways...
but if they're doing magic and stuff, maybe he's there.
They had a party. It was something like "Be Your Own Madness" was the theme of the party. So all of these people showed up in what they thought of as their version of being mad. Kenneth Anger was at this party, and he actually is like, you know what? Let's make this into a movie. And he had all of those people come back dressed as the characters from this, and he actually filmed it at that house. Samson DeBreer is the main character that you're talking about, eating the jewels. Yeah. He plays about 4 different characters throughout that movie, and once again, it's just interesting seeing like how his own personal life influenced all this stuff.
That theme of madness is maybe more fitting than like how I was describing this before, because I don't know if it is actually sinister. It's not scary, it's off-putting, but I think just the madness and kind of manicness that the film kind of takes on after everybody has had whatever this drink is or is supposed to represent.
Yeah, it's really cool though.
His next film, which I think is the last of, for me, the most interesting and impactful films of his out of this list, Scorpio Rising, released in 1962. So as I just was going to mention, this was the first time where there's a big gap between these films. Before, it's 47, 49, like it's kind of every year, every other year. And here, suddenly we're skipping from 54 to 62. So even not knowing, for me, watching this, like his personal life and what's happening in those 8 years, visually, things are a little different. He kind of tones down how much he's superimposing stuff, but the actual like hecticness of what's happening on screen didn't change a lot from this film.
Yeah, and also, like, in terms of the personal stuff, essentially what was going on is he had had a period of living in France, kind of in destitute, or just things weren't going good.
Which makes sense to me. Like,
Yeah.
I asked you when we were watching these, like, how does someone making short films and that are like this, and from when they were made, make a living? And you're like, oh, they don't.
And I don't think he did. He was essentially someone who was just kind of used to being babied by his family, and his grandmother essentially would give him money to kind of live and pay rent. But that's a big problem. Probably why we don't see the newest Kenneth Anger movie coming out is because he didn't develop that kind of self-reliance. And through that, he was always just pissed that people wouldn't give him money to make these amazing things, essentially what would happen. So one thing that did happen during this period was his mother did die during his time of France. And I think that also goes into the Cameron stuff. I think he kind of used her as a little bit of a maternal figure. And what had happened was he came back from France and he moved to New York City, which is how we get into Scorpio Rising, which does take place in New York.
Yeah, and just tonally, I think that's what we're kind of responding to here. Inauguration just seems really magical.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's really digging into his belief system. He's with this artistic group of people. And then Scorpio Rising just seems kind of, it is. It's gritty. I remember learning that the guy's room that Scorpio do we start in on with the movie, his house just smelled like cat piss. It's kind of needlessly violent and just kind of this look into a culture that I don't really even think I want to understand. It just gets really dark. And even though the music is great and peppy, it definitely feels different. It feels like things are falling apart in a different way.
There's been people that have suggested that this movie is actually more or less a remake of Inauguration for the Pleasure Dome. In the way of, it's essentially the same kind of thing. Something starts, and then some kind of drug is ingested, and then you're seeing kind of these crazy results that happen. The one thing that marks Scorpio Rising different, and what I think you guys are relating to, is this is kind of introduced with Fireworks too, all the way back, but it's kind of this death wish that Kenneth Anger has, and it's something that really involves in a lot of his movies. Essentially what you're seeing in Scorpio Rising, like you're talking about, his name in the film is Scorpio because he was a Scorpio. His name was Byron. I forget the last name of him. He's someone that was really pissed at this movie, and he spent his whole life like showing up at screenings of this film, like on the outside, like, I'm Scorpio, it's not fucking Kenneth Anger. Like,
oh my God.
He really took, like, he was really upset because during clippings of this in papers, people would always put pictures of him up and say Kenneth Anger. So it really, and he never got paid what he felt was owed to him to be paid. And it kind of ruined his life. He went on throughout the rest of his life showing up just trying to, so angry by this.
And some of these guys also were upset at being their lives and party and themselves just being homoeroticized, they felt in the movie. That's not to say they didn't do the things that were in this movie. It was just, it's kind of a documentary, but there was some anger around the circumstances of the movie in a lot of different ways.
And what she's referring to there is like essentially what this movie is. It's as close to a documentary that Kenneth Anger ever made, because he just ingratiated himself within this biker gang that existed in Coney Island, and they liked him. They thought he was cool. He was just a guy with a camera. He worked by himself so he could really befriend these people, and he just wanted to document them, which is essentially what he did. The film starts off with him, these guys just working on their bikes, doing the same stuff that they normally would do. But the scene that you're talking about is kind of midway through. There's like this weird party.
By the way, where are all these parties happening?
Yeah, it's a really bizarre party. It looks pretty cool.
The Lucifer and biker parties again.
But it looks extremely homoeroticized. And you know whose fault it was? It was the fault of these bikers because they wouldn't allow their girlfriends to be filmed. So it looks like these guys are like rubbing their penises on each other.
You can film the butts, but you're not going to get my girlfriend in this movie.
There were at least like two or three instances where it kind of went beyond just like friendly male camaraderie, and then it did seem sexual, just what they were doing themselves, I guess.
Yeah, and if you listen to Kenneth Anger I love it, during the commentary through this, he says, "This is what I would call boys just being boys." Which is just terrific. But this movie is the most influential of all of Kenneth Anger's films. It's the one on a larger cinematic scope that influenced specifically and more importantly Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese wouldn't have utilized music the way that he did in films, well, throughout all of his work, but he basically saw this and he figured out how to do Mean Streets with all that amazing music. Kenneth Anger's pretty pissed at everyone in Hollywood that easily like stole stuff from him and never gave him the credit that was deserved. Martin Scorsese's the one person that he says at least made an attempt to apologize to him.
This might have been the first one that included music that I was already familiar with.
Right.
Like Hit the Road Jack was a song that was playing in this. So I like jotted down like, oh, hey, like here's this thing that I know. But I thought that this was also a film that had quicker cuts and just kind of a different energy and like sharper, kind of harsher vibe to it than those prior to this. It's interesting to me knowing that this is a gay filmmaker starting off before that was even something legal to be in this country. Like, not even do, but just like be yourself in this country. Having kind of all the sexualized imagery of like sailors and then with bikers, and those being kind of two different like stereotypes. Like thinking of like YMCA and stuff. Those are two like outfits or characters that are prevalent in like anything associated with that song. And I think back and I wonder if that was already existing when he was doing this, or if he is a part of like why that became a thing. I think
it's the latter. I think like the leather aesthetic and all this, I think it came from this
straight
right?
up. Yeah, straight up.
Okay, I'm looking because Dustin, by the way, I mean, we kind of talked about this. Dustin is one who really, really is into Kenneth Anger and kind of studied his life. But that's my understanding of it, is that this movie influenced film and like fashion and culture, biker culture, all kind of in one fell swoop.
Because even though like we see it now and we definitely recognize the homosexual undertones, it wouldn't necessarily be the case all the time. There's definitely like bikers that saw this movie and were like, fuck yeah, I'm getting a studded leather jacket.
It was very like masculine.
Yeah.
The entire time. Yeah. Because even when they showed one character kind of like in bed looking at comics and stuff, and they showed some of those comic pages, it's just showing like male characters. Like he has just like Rebel Without a Cause poster or something on his wall. Like it is all just like masculine dudes.
Yeah,
the
there's like this
time.
Idealistic like you said, masculine thing to it. Like even the Brando thing and all the I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you guys have hit the nail 100% on the head. And also, going back to it, this movie also, a lot of the previous ones too, autobiographically speak to what Kenneth Anger on a personal level is actually attracted to. Kenneth Anger, it's been noted, is really into like beefy, muscular, perfect physique, like myself kind of guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
And this movie has a lot of moments like that, you know. He wore blue velvet.
The music. You can't sing the music.
He
blue
gets
green
3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Sorry, gosh, that's hard. These movies are so associated with it.
The one thing that did take me aback from this one, though, is seeing swastikas.
Yeah.
Like there was a Nazi flag shown. And when I was watching it, I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, hey, the people making this support this, because it was kind of associated with, at least I felt like, one of the specific characters that was being portrayed. But then there is like a murder and somebody being fed to animals and like covered in peanut butter and like random sudden like hateful violence, which didn't really exist in some of his other films. Even when there like is violence in a couple of them, this was different than that.
You know what's interesting? It's not a murder that actually happens. It's a initiation ritual. So the guy, I know exactly what you're talking about. He actually has like a list of all the different chapters of what actually happens, which is really fascinating. But this particular biker or wannabe biker is trying to get in this group. And what I think the only reason I brought it up, because I think you'll find this interesting, they take mustard and they rub it on his genitals. and he's like getting burnt. But in the background, sound editing extraordinaire Kenneth Anger puts pigs squealing.
Yeah,
so it gives the feeling of something really nefarious and terrible happening. I had mentioned earlier that this movie is the closest to a documentary that Kenneth Anger got to. And the reason is, essentially, this movie follows exactly the chain of events that actually took place with this biker gang. And what you're watching, the reason that the Nazi imagery gets brought up, I think there's actually two, but I'll speak to the first point, is what happens is, do you remember the scene where he takes the white powder and puts it up his nose? There's a point where he takes this, it's a bottle that just says, it has like a skull and crossbones, like death. He puts it in his nose and snuffs it, and then right then it goes to a cut of Dracula. And like from that point, it starts kind of this whole drug world, which existed in Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, where this kind of happens. What he's actually snorting, and for real, he did, is meth. He was a meth head. Which goes back to the way he looks, too. That Scorpio has, like, blonde hair, which is a very common meth thing.
Aryan thing,
yep, that happens. What happens is, though, he eventually busts into a church. There was just a church that was going to get knocked down. He busts into this church, and he's all fucked up on meth, essentially. And he jumps up on the pulpit or whatever, and he starts, like, giving this whole, like, Nazi Hitler speech. So that's the reason why he utilizes that. He starts trying to show silently what is actually happening in the story. In real life, he just, like, jumped up on the table, like, pissed into his helmet, and started to give a Nazi... It's really crazy. Otherwise, the Nazi stuff, because I think it is something that comes into his films. Kenneth Anger was a product of World War II. So, like, he had, like, an inherent kind of, I think, historical, like, you know, I think that was just part of his world that we can't really even understand.
Well, it was part of his upbringing if he was born in 30-ish.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And these bikers... And this particular group would actually utilize Nazi imagery just to scare people. They did it as a scare tactic, essentially. So,
which kind of ties into Custom Car Commandos coming out 3 years later, which again has like starts with some slower shots of guys just like working on cars and whatnot, but also lots of crotch and butt shots.
Yeah, it might be the most homoerotic movie of all of them.
Yeah.
I love it, though.
But it also includes some kind of like Hell's Angels looking dudes. There's swastikas again, but I don't think they're as prevalent in this one. But it seems kind of
you're thinking of Invocation. Custom Car Commandos is the one that's literally just in pink, and he's literally just rubbing his car.
Okay. I was like tying them together, but I guess that was... bridging the gap between these other two. So here's just like an infomercial for cars.
I think that's all that movie really is. Are you familiar with that one as much? Have you watched it as much?
I've seen it.
It's like it feels like a music video.
Yeah,
it's not
cars. Just cars.
It was supposed to be a part of a larger movie that never happened. All of his movies are littered with these moments where
they're all like, this is supposed to be the pitch for this feature film, but instead it just is what it is.
And he would get money from these things. He would go and say, here's Custom Car Commandos. What do you think? I'm going to make this into a larger feature.
And was that spelled with all Ks?
Yeah, I don't know what that's all about. Yeah, it's definitely
we know what that's all about.
Yeah, I think it goes to a larger thing once again of him trying to be naughty. I think that's just like his whole thing.
Well, that's the thing. I think where I get kind of uncomfortable talking about this stuff with Kenneth Anger is, and with the bikers by the same extension. It's like, if you're saying this stuff to get a rise out of people or to scare people, you don't get to say, just kidding.
I agree.
I don't actually endorse genocide. I just playfully, and you know, it's the same thing. And I think that's where, like, I want to say I love Kenneth Anger in his movies, but there's just like this ickiness to it that
kind of like once we hit the
definitely.
60s.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's pretty far gone by that point. I agree. And, you know, once again, it goes back to his influence of all the Crowley stuff. Crowley used to do that, the most wicked man in the world. He was, like, all about trying to be this evil dude, and I think that definitely rubs off on him.
Yes, he has that influence with, I feel like just saying this out loud, it sounds like I'm trying to correct you, but Crowley.
Crowley, thank you. No,
doing all that, and then he kind of had some friendship. I don't know when that all started with LaVey. Anton LaVey.
Yeah.
Just people who are like little devil horns, evil, like trying to get attention for these kind of like naughty evil, and we've talked about that with Kenneth Anger too, but I just think you kind of have that line that kind of gets blurred with him where, like I said before, I guess it kind of bears repeating, and maybe we can just kind of cut my rambling out here, but it's just the intention doesn't really matter, because what's coming across is kind of anti-Semitic or violent imagery.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's a problem.
And you can't comfortably say I'm in love with Kenneth Anger for that reason.
Right.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. But this is a good segue into getting to Invocation. You started to talk about his various nefarious, that sounded cool, various nefarious, relationships with kind of interesting people, but Anton LaVey being one of them. By this point in his career, he had moved to San Francisco, and he had really taken on this crazy lifestyle of essentially practicing these rituals and really getting all the Crowley stuff.
You got to eat crow.
You've got to eat crow.
You're eating crow by saying Crowley.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I was trying to make a better joke for like the last hour, and I couldn't. So just
he moved into this Russian embassy, which is a house that still exists out there, and he started to go on the search of trying to make his ultimate moment, the pinnacle of all of his religious beliefs, which was supposed to be Lucifer Rising, which was 1967 is when this is supposed to take off. And he started this process of going to these various, happenings happening in Haight-Ashbury, trying to find the perfect Lucifer, the light bearer. And he was going to make this film that was going to be, all of this stuff. And the person that he eventually found to be his Lucifer was someone by the name of Bobby Beausoleil. But before we get there, did you guys know there was one Lucifer that preceded him, which was a little boy? Did you know that? Mm-hmm. Do you know his name?
Nope.
Gadot? Gadot?
Godot?
Yeah, it's something like that. He was
G-A-D-O-T. It's Godot if it's Frenchy, but...
He was like a 7-year-old boy that Kenneth Anger was at a party of these pretty, famous hippies.
Yeah, there's some Frank Zappa connection.
Yeah, it's something like that.
He was perpetually in the weirdest scenes he could possibly access.
He was really impressed with this little boy, though, because one time a police officer showed up, and the police officer was like, hey, there was drugs or something being ingested or something, and this little boy was 7, opened the door and just told him to fuck off. And Kenneth Anger's that boy is Lucifer. But unfortunately, it's not a happy story. He fell from a skylight and died.
What a strange life Kenneth Anger has lived.
Yeah.
So we go from Invocation. We already talked about Rabbit's Moon 2.0 a couple years later, which we can probably skip.
Oh, no, that one's coming again, actually.
But we talked about it.
We kind of talked about it. Yeah.
We can get there if you want. Do you want to?
Dustin has something else he wants
to say. I don't really. No, okay. That's fine. Yeah.
We'll breeze past that. And then skipping ahead to the 80s, Lucifer Rising.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's going to kind of get into this other film that kind of happens. This whole Lucifer Rising thing is kind of a pretty long, like you said, a 20-year period of kind of this whole thing happening. He met Bobby Beausoleil. It's kind of up in the air how it happened. It either was just at some performance of his rock band playing. Bobby Beausoleil was really involved pre-Manson in the Hollywood kind of music scene. He played in Love with Arthur Lee. He played with Frank Zappa. He's actually on the first Frank Zappa album. So he was someone who's a very talented musician, and had it not have been for his dastardly choices that he made, I feel strongly probably would have became a famous musician at that time, because he was easily a part of that whole world. But he was allegedly playing at an orgy. Is that what it was that Kenneth Anger was at?
That sounds right.
So I don't know if that's right, but yeah, I think.
Yeah, and essentially he saw him, and all of the girls loved Bobby Beausoleil.
Which, to be fair, good looking, but a little neckbeardy.
Yeah, not that
Have
good
you looked
looking.
at pictures of him?
Yeah, he's not that good looking.
His style definitely ruins it. I almost like prison Bobby Beausoleil.
I agree, yeah.
Better than little top hat Bobby Beausoleil.
Yeah, because prison Bobby Beausoleil kind of looks like a somewhat handsome pirate.
Or like a pirate who could like fix an air conditioner.
Yeah. But for whatever reason, he was just like, you are my Lucifer. You are the angel of disobedience. He just saw him and just thought, this is my guy that I want. So essentially he said, come be in my movie. What he would do is he would basically kind of do like the casting couch kind of thing and have these men come over to his house and be like, you're going to be my Lucifer, stay here. And then he would
never mind.
Yeah, that's what it was. Bobby Beausoleil wasn't gay in any way, shape, or form, though. He was like extremely, like very much a hedonist and had, just all kinds of ladies, essentially. But he lived in this house in the Russian embassy.
They had kind of a fraught relationship and...
Yeah, but a lasting one, kind of a lifelong friendship. Essentially, he was going to be Lucifer in the show, in the movie, and then he was also going to make the soundtrack for it in 1967. So Kenneth Anger gave him the ballroom in the Russian embassy. Like he had that room, and Kenneth Anger had this little tiny room with a disco ball that he would do whatever he was doing. But he would have Bobby Beausoleil's band, the magical powerhouse of Oz, rehearsing for this. To make the long story short on this, essentially,
so he ends up murdering someone, Bobby Beausoleil, kind of ruining that. They have to pull in Mick Jagger instead.
Yeah, essentially.
They have to settle for Mick Jagger.
Well, the thing that happened, though, is the...
Afterthought Mick Jagger.
Kenneth Anger always said that Bobby Beausoleil stole the canisters of film that existed in the original Lucifer Rising. It kind of looks like that's not the case of what actually happened, though.
No, I think it's pretty well...
established that that's not true.
Right, because they have the footage of him...
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah, so essentially...
allegedly stolen.
Yeah. So they scrapped together a movie of film. It's not Lucifer Rising, but it's this insane movie called Invocation of My Demon Brother, which really encapsulates this whole Bobby Beausoleil kind of time. So for anyone that's interested, you definitely should watch it. It's pretty unique. What's the year on that? 69?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we go from 69 for that, and then... Lucifer Rising is 81.
Yeah, so we have another, except for Rabbit's Moon 2, for which
71.
nothing new is shot.
Yeah.
You mentioned we already talked about. That's
the only
71.
71, okay.
All I wanted to say about that Rabbit's Moon version, he only made that for a birthday present for Stan Breakage, his son. That's all it was. It's called the kiddie version of...
Oh, no wonder our daughter likes it.
Yeah.
It's really sweet.
Yeah, and it has an amazing soundtrack by a band called A Raincoat, which is totally just an awesome song. But Invocation feels like... I think it's scarier than Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, but for the same reason I find it terrifying. There's a violent undercurrent to that movie and a real darkness that's really scary to me.
Yeah, because I think the sexuality has been largely stripped after Inauguration, but that's just been channeled into like different types of anger and things. Like,
it seems like
these are all types of anger.
Yes. Oh, very angry.
Kenneth
Very angry, yes. It's the one that's closest in terms of the mirror of representing the time, right? This movie fits right in with like Give Me Shelter or any of these darker kind of late 60s movies. It has like a really everyone's gonna die kind of feel to it. Yeah. Did you guys like that one? What did you think of it?
That was kind of the start of the tale for me, and it wasn't disliking it, but there was less to kind of engage with and not be perturbed by.
Yeah. What's your thought on it? It seemed like you kind of liked it more than maybe even me.
I mean, I'm good with it. It's repetitive. It's, especially talking about are you talking about Invocation?
Yeah, Invocation,
still?
yeah.
Okay, we keep trying to push it past Invocation.
I know, but it's important. It's important.
It back.
Yeah.
The Moog synthesizer, like the... I guess maybe we can sing that because we're just making dinosaur noises.
The music in that one, I think, is the most different.
It
sounds like kind of like broken and just...
And that's Mick Jagger. Like, that's what he came up with. Which
was that.
I have a hard time thinking that he didn't just phone that one in. But it does fit tonally. And if, we talked about finding, like, a YouTube playlist, there are lots of, like, alternative soundtracks people have tried to put to this or put on their own. I do think that having the Mick Jagger soundtrack is the best way to watch it.
It adds,
obnoxious as it is.
It adds to the freakiness of it and kind of the unsettling nature of that film. I certainly think so. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You're talking about Mick Jagger. He had kind of ingratiated himself within the rock hierarchy of like the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin at this time. So that's kind of interesting. So now we're getting into like this bigger, like kind of huge gap that happens between once the official Lucifer Rising is released in 81. One reason that there's such a gap, once again, he was big time in destitute, and what he did was he actually did make an official version of Hollywood Babylon, and his own personal reputation at this point changes. He was previously thought of as like this really high art, film director, but then he kind of releases this really ridiculous book that fascinates everyone. Everyone is really into it, but they take it for the gospel truth. But they kind of like, as time goes, he establishes a reputation as just being a trashy gossip monger.
And this is where it seems like sentiment toward him. I mean, I know I'm kind of restating what you said, but things shifted. He was seen as this avant-garde filmmaker. Even if he did have these kind of abrasive qualities, people still really kind of wanted to keep him in their back pocket because he was like a cool underground dude. And then all of a sudden he became not necessarily more mainstream, but just known as sort of an obnoxious fellow. Like people kind of got annoyed by him, and his reputation soured.
He did all kinds of weird shit. Like he pronounced himself dead in the San Francisco Times. He put out an obituary for himself. And I think he does suffer from bipolar. I think that there's some mental kind of illness stuff happening, but essentially he can't get money to film anything, but he did ingratiate himself within this rock kind of thing, and he got all of this funding through London somehow to make officially Lucifer Rising, which when you do watch it is the culminating moment in all of this, and it feels a lot different.
It's the only one that, for me, I could like tell the budget. Where like, some of his early stuff, I never would have guessed it was from 47 or 49 because it seemed so ahead of its time. And I don't know if maybe it's because this one seemed like it was supposed to have a bigger scale and with Egypt and the pyramids and things. But knowing that, the aforementioned like Empire Strikes Back, like stuff like that was happening, similar time frame.
That's interesting.
Compared to this, like you can tell this is an indie film compared to that. Instead of like pushing the boundaries on a budget, it's more like, okay, you have a budget.
Yeah.
Like you can tell watching this one.
Yeah, seeing Marianne Faithfull kind of emerge from this, stone and all these. Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel.
It's not as cutting edge.
Yeah, it doesn't feel ahead of its time magical. It's cool. I love the imagery, and I think it's a really neat movie, and I think it's indicative of it pulls in a lot of like the Egyptian parts of Thelema and things like that, but it feels, like you said, indie.
Yeah. It's the one for me. It's my personal favorite. Maybe it's because it's towards the end, but I personally, every time I watch it, I sense a real sense of loss. I sense a real sense of mournfulness. Since watching that, I've definitely taken on, the biography aspect of him, I've definitely looked into a lot. So I think it's reminiscent of all of the players within that film kind of all being at points of their life that aren't so great. You have Kenneth Anger, who's kind of, everyone has rejected him. This is kind of his last gulp effort at doing something. You have all of that history, but at this point, Bobby Beausoleil's in prison for murdering somebody.
Right.
And somehow, he connects with Kenneth Anger, hearing that Jimmy Page was supposed to do the soundtrack, but they had a falling out. He says, listen, man, I know I'm in prison, but let me do the soundtrack for this. I want to finish what I started with you in 1967. And somehow he got the funding and he pulled it together. Kenneth Anger went and met with him and told him that, no one ever replaced you. And they kind of had this patching up. And, it's still the only soundtrack that was ever released in a prison. It's pretty insane how that worked. And I think it's not to find sympathy with Bobby Beausoleil, because obviously he did a terrible, awful thing. But I think the music informs kind of the sadness of how someone's life gets so fucked up. Mm-hmm. And then you're also talking about Marianne Faithfull. I know that she was kind of in her drug kind of period through that film. Yeah,
there's the stuff with her. I think you were the one telling me about, heroin being in her makeup and just all this.
Yeah, she accidentally she was powdering her face with heroin. Yeah.
This seems like especially crazy.
It does.
That maybe seems like a Kenneth Anger lie, but
No, I think it's true. I think she's even said so. I think she was really fucked up during this period. I think it's definitely worth watching. Maybe in terms of some of the magical stuff, it might not stick out as much, but it's also the only movie that utilizes nature.
Yeah, because there's been animals prevalent in a few of these, but they come up more here, and it's like a more varied collection of them. And I think there's one film earlier that has kind of like a volcano type thing, and here they like really hone in more on just kind of nature and destructive nature.
Yeah, This is also the most positive of all of his movies. A lot of the previous movies are about this death wish kind of idea. This one's about life, is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the rising of Lucifer in the new age, essentially, right? Like, isn't that kind of the idea?
Yeah, we see Kenneth Anger performing magic ritual, and we see, I don't know, yeah.
You actually see him doing it, and Lucifer within the Crowley stuff isn't thought to be what we all think of as Lucifer. What is it exactly?
That I don't know.
I think it's supposed to be like the light bearer god. It's like the angel of disobedience, but he's not necessarily a bad character. I think it's just something that he strongly
Which yet again, Kenneth Anger would absolutely associate with. But.
Yeah. In interviews, he would say, well, you want to know what my name is? Pop. And he'd show people Lucifer. I think it's the most autobiographical.
I love how happy he is to take off his shirt around people at all ages and all times.
Can you imagine this 90-year-old man now at Chocolatery Stom just opening up his little Lucifer shirt?
Picking out the red gummies.
Can we put a name on your order at Starbucks? Sure.
Kapow!
At the end of this film, you can actually look in the background and you can see that something's burning in between these two Egyptian statues, and it's actually the script of that film. He burns it in Egypt, and I think it's telling. To me, even though there are films that come after this one, to me it definitely feels like the end, more or less, of kind of his career. Some of his later movies are fun.
They're silly.
Mouse Heaven.
Yeah. Yep. I feel like Mickey Mouse a whole lot. But yeah, this feels like, I mean, it makes sense. This is the end of the Magick Lantern Cycle because it feels like a bookend.
Yep.
The cycle is complete.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think
Ritual is complete.
I think we did a pretty good job going through this. We're going to try to load on here a curated version of all these movies that have the correct soundtracks to go with them. So I'm sure not everyone has seen these films. We'd really like to encourage you to do it. So
we'll throw in some Mouse Heaven.
Whether it's a Spotify playlist or a YouTube playlist or both, whatever we curate, we will add to the episode description on this podcast so that you can find it.
Yes. So, I don't know what this... Oh, I see. Looks like it says PAX. Doesn't for me. So, if there are any other thoughts on Kenneth Anger, we'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thelanterncinema@gmail.com currently. Same goes for corrections or anything else you want to say. We'd love to engage in a dialogue and turn this more into a dialogue. So please feel free to send an email. For now, something we have regretfully neglected to do so far is send major thanks to the gentleman helping us with sound and music on this whole thing. That's Patrick Tape Fleming.
Hopefully our listeners will notice a tremendous increase